So I propose to have this discussion this morning about the question of quantitative versus qualitative method in child and adolescent psychiatric research. Who is already aware of what are qualitative research? Don't be shy. Oh, nobody is aware about what is a qualitative study? No? Yes. Yes. Okay. Anyway, do you know what is the definition of scientific methods? There are many of them. And my favorite one is this one. If the scientist had an infinity of time at his disposal, it would be sufficient to say to him, look and look carefully. But since he has no time to look at everything, and above all to look carefully, and since it is better not to look at all than to look carelessly, he is forced to make a selection. The first question is then to know how to make this selection. And this is exactly what does a scientist. A scientist look and look carefully. And because we have not that much time, we have to select what we are going to look. And this is the reason why many physicians have problems to do scientific research, because a physician looks at patients, but he has to look at patients very quickly. Because we have to see many patients a day, for many reasons. And so when you become a scientist, you have to take your time and to take even years to look at things. And this is some kind of, this raises some level of anxiety for many physicians. They want to be fast, quick, to obtain quickly results. When you are a scientist, if you want to be quick, you will obtain dirty results. So you have to look carefully, and you have to select, and selection corresponds to the design of the study, in fact. And at the moment, in the whole scientific activity, whether it is sociology, anthropology, physics, even mathematics, we will come to that point, which is an interesting point, and biomedical research, you have two ways to do research, the quantitative approach and the qualitative approach. The quantitative, I just begin during 10 minutes about the quantitative approach. You have had some talk yesterday about that, about some design, cohorts, case control studies, etc. You will have some other. But just to raise some old questions, I am sure that you have been taught that there are experimental design and observational design. That when you experiment, there is a high level of control. When you observe, there is no influence of reality. And there is some kind of cultural bias when considering experiment and observation. Experiment design are supposed to be aristocratic, good science, hard science. And when you observe, this is some kind of second level science. This is crazy. This is crazy because first, it is not so obvious to discriminate experiment to observation. Claude Bernard had a very strange thing about that. He has a Canadian colleague, it was during the 19th century. The Canadian colleague, who was a physician, one day had a patient who had shot in his belly with a gun. And so there was a hole between the air and the interior of the stomach. A stomy, you call that a stomy? Mm-hmm. A natural stomy. And the Canadian physician kept this man as a gardener, and every day he looked inside the belly to look at how the digestion worked. And Claude Bernard said, wait, is it an experiment or is it an observation? Because he didn't do anything, just to look at, but it was some kind of experiment. Just to tell you that, in fact, the difference between experiment and observation is something very subtle, and in fact you have excellent observational study and experimental study which are rubbish. Concerning the design, in biomedical research, you have three types of design, which correspond to descriptive methods, analytical methods, and something which is very important in medicine, evaluation of treatment. We have seen that yesterday. And here again, descriptive studies are supposed to be a little bit second level, low level scientific research, while this is completely unfair. For instance, there has been recently in the last 20 years, some amazing descriptive studies in child and adolescent psychiatry. In particular, you see the studies, the longitudinal studies that have shown that there are trajectory of development in kids across age. In particular, the work of Richard Tremblay, who shows that when you look at the level of aggressivity of kids from 1 year to 15 years, it raises, do you know at which age a human being has the most important number of aggressive behavior during his life? Do you know at which age it is?
3 years.
3 years. 3 years. It raises from when he's 6 months, he cannot move, so there is no aggression. Then it raises at 3, and then it decreases. It decreases steeply for the girls and more slowly for the boys. And there is a trajectory of boys which does not decrease, and these boys statistically have externalized disorder, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant, etc., etc. And so this is only some descriptive study, but for us this is extremely valuable. So description can be very important. Of course, analytical research, cohorts, case control study are very useful to have risk factor. And evaluation, we have seen that yesterday, to evaluate treatment, this is something very important. Objective and measurement, this is crucial in child and adolescent psychiatry. Inclusion criteria, outcomes, explanatory variable, all these are measurements. And the specificity of our measurement is that some are objective and some are subjective. Do you know what is the definition of subjectivity? Many times people believe that subjectivity, this is some kind of soft measurement, not reliable, dependent on the observer, etc. No, subjectivity is a measurement related to a subject considered as a thinking subject. And objectivity, it is a measurement of something, of a concept, which is related to the subject considered as an object. For instance, when you measure blood pressure, this is objective because you don't need to be a thinking subject to have a blood pressure. But when you measure sadness, depression, this is a subjective measurement because only a thinking subject can be sad. And you understand that in psychiatry, we are obliged to measure subjective measurement because we are dealing with thinking subjects. And in addition, objective measurement are always surrogate measurements. This is crucial. Many colleagues consider that because it is objective, it is better. Well, in fact, in psychiatry, this is exactly the opposite, because we are dealing with thinking subject because psychiatry is related to the thinking subject. The gold standard corresponds to the subjective measurement. What is objective is only a surrogate. It can be a fascinating surrogate. And most often they are, but they are only surrogates. So be proud to use subjective measurement, but you have to use them in a reliable way. Okay, so this is the basis of methods, of quantitative methods, and you all know that. You know also that there are some keywords in quantitative research: randomization, sample size, statistical power, evidence. We could speak a lot about these words. In particular, randomization. We have spoken a little bit yesterday about randomization. Here again, there is a misunderstanding about this concept. Many times people consider that we randomize to have an equilibrium between the characteristics of the groups. You have heard that, no? to have an homogeneity of character. Well, if you are unlucky in the randomization, you can have very different groups. If you want to have homogeneous group, you have to pair the groups, to stratify. Randomization is not used to have homogeneous group. It has to have groups determined by at random, and so that we can use statistics on them. Randomization is the only way to use statistics in a reliable way. And this is why we randomize. When we randomize, this is the only situation where the p-value, the p-value that is supposed to be inferior to 5%. When you randomize, this is the only way to have a p-value, which means that it is a p-value. When you do not randomize, you don't know really what is the meaning of the p-value. This is the discovery of Fisher during the 1930s. Before Fisher, people used pair sample. And decided to randomize, and it was a shame at that moment. It was a shame because if randomization does not work, then groups can be different, but they can be different by chance. And we know what chance can do with probabilities. Another thing about randomization, many people, perhaps you have heard that, people say that when you randomize, this is the only way to have a causal relationship between the treatment and the outcome. Did you hear that? No? When you have an observational study, you have correlation and no causality. When you randomize, you have causality. Sometimes people say that. And just ask them, what do you mean by causality? And you will have a blank. Of course, there are 3,000 years of Occidental philosophy which try to deal with the question of causality, and nobody agrees with what it is. And so, statisticians have their own definition of causality, which belong to statistics, but it is one among many others. And so they are not supposed to have the truth about metaphysics. So, causality and medicine, in particular in our specialty, is not a good word. Sample size, crucial when you want to do a quantitative study. Crucial. Evidence. You know what is the definition of evidence? Sometimes we use evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine. But what means evidence? A proposition is evidence. There is evidence in a proposition when it is obtained from a good methodology and when it leads to a belief. You need belief to have an evidence. You understand what I mean? Belief. You have to. And so, evidence is some kind of soft thing, This is not supposed. And the same design in child and adolescent psychiatry and in HIV, exactly the same design, the same sample size, the same method, the same results. The level of evidence will be much higher in HIV than child and adolescent psychiatry. Because of the measurement, because of the topic, the level of belief will be lower, and the subjective feeling about evidence will not be the same. That's life. We have to deal with that. If we want to be convincing in our specialty, we have to use even harder methodologies. That's life. That's life. Now, there is some kind of this is not a revolution, but this is a big change about methods. We have now big data. This is a fashion word, but this is reality. We have genomics, proteomics, etc. Health insurance database, very important for us. In our group, we have discussed that yesterday. Pharmacoepidemiology is going to do impressive progress because of insurance database. Social network. Our patients are often on social network, and there are fascinating studies that determine who is a friend of who, etc., etc. And you have pattern of friendship, and of course, when you have an autistic spectrum disorder, you have some kind of outlier about your pattern of friendship, etc. And you can study that, and it is free. Well, you have only to have friends in Facebook, in the field. Forum, also very interesting. On forum, people can, for instance, there are forums on depression, on ADHD, etc. And here, parents or patients write things about their feeling, about medication, about ADHD, etc. And this is very interesting because we are not here, you know. When patient or family speak to us, there is a social disability bias, which is amazing, which is very high. And so, there is, you know, this is like an iceberg. We have only the top of the iceberg. We never know, we, physicians, what is below the water. And when you go on the forum, you can see what is below the water, because they have the feeling that we do not read them, but we can. This is open to everybody. And we did, for instance, some text mining analyzing on forum of antidepressant drugs, and we had the first side effect of SSRI in young adults. Do you know what is the first side effect of SSRI in young adults, as considered by patients themselves? It is the problem to stop the medication. I thought it would have been sexuality. But they don't speak that much about sexuality. Their main problem is how to stop the medication. And for me, it was a medical problem that I have to deal with the half-life of the drug, etc. I thought it was simple. No, for them this is not simple. And this is not a question of half-life. This is how to get rid of this protection. So we have to learn a lot, and this is free. And you have no IRB, ethics committee, etc. You can use this data. Everybody can use this data. Google search queries. You have a tool which is Google Trend. And so you can access it freely, and you have all the words that have been entered on Google every day. And so you can use suicide and see the number of times suicide has been written in Google queries each day during the 10 last years. And you can see that it is correlated with some events when a singer has committed a suicide. You have, and here again, you can use that freely. So I think this is what I had to say about quantitative research. And you know all that. This is your business. This is what you do when you read papers. Now there are also qualitative research, and this is by many colleagues, many academic colleagues, this is like the dark side of the force. This is not so serious. And it comes from a very old story. It is supposed that there are two different perspectives concerning research, with some big words, big epistemological words. Constructivism versus positivism. Positivism, which considers that there is a reality, this reality is outside us, and we can objectively study this reality. Constructivism is exactly the contrary. We are not sure that reality exists independently of us, and for instance, the color. This is some kind of brown or yellow, and brown or yellow is a construction of my mind. Brown or yellow does not exist in reality because this is a color. Color does not exist in reality. This comes from a mixture of what happened in my eyes and in my visual cortex. Words versus number. There are some people who like to write and to use words to say things, and there are some people who like to use numbers. Exploratory versus confirmatory. Hypothetical deductive research. This is supposed to be the gold standard of research. Exploratory is some kind of fishing expedition, not very serious. Inductive versus deductive. Deductive, you know, this is a syllogism, logic, hard logic. Induction is some kind of intuition which generates hypotheses. Subjective versus objective, we have seen that. Real world versus laboratory. Accuracy versus reliability, we come back to that. Engagement with material versus neutral. Science is supposed to be neutral, outside things that I observe. People working in qualitative studies are supposed to be an active part of the experiment. Okay, so it seems that there is a big separation between this quantitative and qualitative approach, and this is supported by a long story. You know, Pascal, the philosopher, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, separated l'esprit de finesse to l'esprit de géométrie. You know, there would be we would have two ways to think about things, one with some kind of poetry, and one with some kind of formal logic. And you have even some psychological traits about that, you know. I'm sure that in your country, the temperament or the personality of professor in mathematics is not the same as professor in literature, you know. This is the case in all countries. And there are books about that, very interesting for us, for children who have problems with mathematics, dyscalculia, things like that. It may be a cognitive problem. Sometimes also it is a question of superego. Mathematics is related to superego because 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 and you have nothing to say about that. No question to discuss. This is, mathematics are a superego. And some people don't like superego. And so they don't like mathematics. Left, right hemisphere, no, this is an old thing. Nobody speaks about right and left hemisphere. This is old-fashioned, but it is a little bit true anyway. Thinking fast and slow, you see, this comes from Kahneman, the Nobel Prize of Economy, who was developed this opposition between a thinking way to treat information and a slow way to treat information. One close to intuition and worse, one close to logic and science. And soft and hard science, of course. So things could appear very simple. There is a separation between words and numbers, between quantitative and qualitative studies, and people are different, and that's life. And in a way, in faculties, this is the case. You have social and human science on one side, and hard science on the other side, and there is no communication between both. But if you look at carefully, this is not so easy. You know, constructivism versus positivism. Does it exist an external reality? In fundamental physics, this is no more true. You know, in fundamental physics, they do not accept the hypothesis that there is a reality independent to the observer. And us, you know, our object of study, child and adolescent with mental problem, they are not independent to society, to us, to... When you ask question to a kid, you interact with him or her and it changes things. When you give a questionnaire, it changes the people who fill the questionnaire. There is a huge level of evidence that when you give a questionnaire, people are not the same after. How do you do that? For instance, the order of the question has an influence on the answer. And so it means that the question itself modifies the way the patient answers to other questions. Words versus number, okay, in biology, in molecular biology, after all, there are no numbers. There are only words, proteins, genes, ribosome, RNA, etc. They use words, and they do not consider that they are doing qualitative research. They are doing qualitative research. Sometimes they use a little bit of statistics, but sometimes only. Many of their experiments, there is no statistics, only experiments and discoveries. Exploratory versus confirmatory, there is a huge literature which shows that we say in our paper that we are doing confirmatory analysis. But at least one time or two, the hypothesis that we propose in the introduction of the paper, these hypotheses come from the results that we have found in the data. You know, this is fake, and everybody knows that. Because it is impossible to prove that the hypothesis you had does not come from the data. And this is why you have clinicaltrial.gov, you know. Now more and more we oblige people to put the protocol before analyzing the data on the website so that we can be sure that hypothesis was formulated before the data are analyzed. Because, and this is human, you know, most often when you have an hypothesis, it reveals to be not correct. And you are sad. You have worked 1 year, 2 years, you had an hypothesis and it does not work. And you see in the result something which works. And a posteriori, this becomes a wonderful hypothesis that you should have had before. And at the end, you believe that you had this hypothesis before. Yes, yes. And that's not a major problem because many people do that, and everybody knows that many people do that. So this is not so. The main problem is that people themselves do not realize that their hypothesis was not their a priori hypothesis. This is really a shame. Induction versus deduction, you know, in modern epistemology, there is no more deduction, no more induction, there is only abduction. We could speak about that if you want during the discussion, because there is never deduction except in mathematics and in physics. So when you have mathematics, you can do deduction. Even in molecular biology, there are no real deduction. You have a couple of a priori hypotheses and data make a choice between these hypotheses, and this is called abduction. And in fact, this is what people do in qualitative studies also. Subjective versus objective, we have seen that this is not related to word and numbers, this is related to a thinking subject and an object that is sought. Real world versus laboratory, we can do experimental study in real world. This is more difficult, but we can do that, and we can use numbers, we can use statistics in real world, of course. Accuracy versus reliability, this is more complex. This is a question of reproducibility. It is supposed that in qualitative research, you cannot reproduce data, while in quantitative research, you can. But you know also that in the literature, there is an important discussion about the non-reproducibility of many research in psychology and in medicine. And so, this is not only a problem of qualitative studies. And engagement with material, there is an engagement with material in quantitative research also. For instance, many people who do environmental epidemiology are green. You understand what I mean? If they do environmental epidemiology, this is because they like ecology. And many times it biases their results. Their interpretation is biased because they see things in green. Exactly the same, many people working in neuroscience have a particular way to consider thinking subjects. Because I am mainly a scientist, many of my patients are son or daughter of neuroscientists. And this is very funny to see the difference when they speak in Congress and when they speak during the consultation. They are no more the same person. You know, mind is a very strange object. This is an object with a strong symbolic impact. And when you speak about mind as a researcher, it is likely that you have your own conflict of interest in using some words to describe what is mind. You understand what I mean? Okay. So, anyway, what is a qualitative research? I asked you the question yesterday, what are the effects of SSRI? And I told you, well, I have never taken myself some SSRI, so I don't know in fact what it does. And this is the question. You know, the question, what is the effect of methylphenidate, is not, this is not a simple question. The subjective effect of methylphenidate on the patient, this is a tricky question. Most often, you know, they don't realize that their level of ADHD has decreased. People around see that there has been a change, but if you ask to the kids, I'm not changed. and they look at people like that. And so the subjective effect of medication is a real question. So you could tell me, if you do a quantitative study, you will do a randomized control trial, you will use the adolescent depressive rating scale, you will compare your medication to a placebo, you will use a t-test, and you will answer to the question, A is superior to placebo. But it does not give you the answer to the question, what is the effect of SSRI? So what is the design of the study to answer the question? You have to ask to patients, what are the effects of SSRI? Just speak to them and listen to them. And do a synthesis of the answer. This is, in fact, what are qualitative research. And the methods are different. For instance, concerning the sampling, there are never random, not never, but nearly never some random sample. You maximize heterogeneity. If you want to know what is the effect of SSRI in kids and adolescents, you will select girls, boys, old adolescent, young adolescent, kids, rich, poor, black, white, etc., 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 you know. Sample size, no statistics. The number of subjects to include come from the saturation of the data. This is something very particular. When you interview people about the effect of SSRI, the first interview, everything is new. The second, everything is new, a little bit less, etc., etc. And after 20, 30 patients, nothing is new anymore. All what they say has already been said before. And you say that there is a saturation of information, and you stop. Data collection, many ways to use data collection, mainly face-to-face interview, most often semi-structure. You can do group interview. You can use case story, which is something classical in medicine. You can use photo elicitation, diaries, blogs, etc. For instance, we did a study about the photo elicitation of the meal of a patient with anorexia nervosa. You know, it is not so easy to have a full interview with patients with severe anorexia nervosa. Most often they are reluctant to speak. And so we asked them to take a picture of the table where the whole family has a meal. Once everybody has gone, so you have the dishes, the plates, the forks, and they take a photo, and we give them the photo, and they have to speak about what happened during the meal. And we had a very interesting result, which is that one explanation about the fact that the patient didn't eat is that they are disgusted by the fact that the parents are swallowing, you know, and they have food in the mouth, and this is something which is disgusting, and so it makes the nausea, and so basically they don't eat that much, and they eat even less, being with other people. And this information only came because we took time to ask things to patients. And then after you do what is called content analysis. This is, so you have many books about that. This is some kind of coding. It takes many months. You have a transcript of what the patient said, and you take all sentence, and you code the content of all sentence. You can have some computer software that can help you, like NVivo or other software. You code all sentence, and once you have code, you try to find code that are close to one another, and you put this code in categories, in super categories, in hyper categories, etc., 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 so that you have at the end some kind of hierarchical coding. And you have to do that yourself, and another coder has to do that also, so that you can be sure that there is some kind of inter-rater reliability. So, for instance, what is the effect of SSRI? This is a paper published in the Journal of Phenomenological Psychology. The supercodes are relief, disconnection, deprivation, and after SSRI. This is what comes from the interrogation of patients which take SSRI. And then in the paper, you can give illustration of all these supercodes by some sentence given by the patient. And you know, and this is it speaks a lot. When you ask the question, what is the effect of SSRI? You have an answer here. I could hear the anxiety yelling somewhere inside me, but it was muffled, as if someone had put up soundproofing glass. This is exactly what does SSRI. They protect you from intense emotion, but also they protect you from the fact that people can no more be close to you. And you know that this is the side effect of SSRI are within their efficacy. This is not side effect, this is their effect. And one part is good, one part is bad. And you know, this is not within psychopharmacology book or within randomized control trial. So, unfortunately, there are very few studies of this kind. Very few. Now, I would like to discuss with you about the question of why is this separation? Because at the moment, in fact, we can imagine a protocol design that integrates qualitative and quantitative aspects. And this is particularly important and particularly valuable in child and adolescent psychiatry. First, you know, physics and epidemiology are some quantitative discipline. But obviously, they are not the same kind of quantitative discipline. In physics, there are numbers everywhere. In epidemiology, there are not a number everywhere. You cannot describe a whole human being with numbers. This is not possible. While in physics, they describe nature with numbers everywhere. As I told you, molecular biology, there is no real numbers. There are words only, but this is not qualitative study. And you can now do statistics with words. So this is called text mining. So when you do text mining, is it qualitative study because it is words, or is it quantitative study because there are statistics and numbers? And you know, in psychiatry at the moment, you have neuropsychoanalysis. Neuropsychoanalysis, is it a qualitative approach or a quantitative approach, etc., etc. This is a paper which proposes a new way, just for your culture, a new way to distinguish quantitative aspect and qualitative aspect. It considers that a corpus, you know what a corpus is? A data set. Corpus is a data set. It can be with numbers, but it can be you can, you know, when you use physics, there are numbers everywhere. In medicine, you cannot put number everywhere. There are qualitative, for example, the blood group, A, B, O, plus, minus. These are not numbers, these are letters. And in medicine, you have numbers, blood pressure, etc. And you have many ways to describe people with words also. So you have a mixture of words and numbers, while in physics you have only numbers. And you have also what Freud did some work, yes?
I didn't understand the concept of corpus.
Corpus, it is a data set. A data set, it is when you have an Excel file with your data, okay. It is a data set. But Freud wrote some books, and you cannot say that Freud's books were data set. They are books. And so corpus can be a data set, can be a book. This is a material which comes from research.
Okay.
Thank you. So corpus can be only numbers, can be numbers but just for some characteristics, and there are some corpus where there are only words, like Freud's psychoanalysis. And you have also relationship between things. When we do science, we try to find relationship between things, between tobacco and lung cancer, between family history of schizophrenia and schizophrenia, etc. And you have many ways to find relationship. The first one, you may try to find universal law, like in physics. In medicine, we have not that much universal law, you know. There is a correlation between weight and height, but you have high people very thin and small people very large. This is not a universal law. This is a probabilistic law. And for instance, SSRI are effective in treating OCD. Yes, this is true, but some patients resist. So this is not a universal law. This is a statistical law. And you have also assertions that come from an hermeneutic process. That is, for instance, when Freud mentioned this sentence that you know all, sexual life does not begin only at puberty, but start with plain manifestation soon after birth. This is a proposition. This is not really a scientific proposition, but this is a proposition. From what it comes, not from statistics, not from mathematics. This is an interpretation, and this is why we call that, it comes from an hermeneutic process. I see patients, I see reality, I see societies, I see kids, and I say from what I see that there is an association between emergence of sexual life in human being and age. And I see that this emergence comes very early in life. This is not statistics, this is not mathematics, this is hermeneutics. I know for young people who are highly scientific, this is a little bit shocking. Hermeneutics is some kind of magic. But in fact, this is what we do every day, most often. We do not do statistics or mathematics, we interpret things that we see. And you can so propose by this way 9 types of research design. For instance, you can have universal law in a universe where there is only mathematics. This is physics. There is nothing of this kind in child and adolescent psychiatry. Universal law and locally mathematics, you have pharmacokinetics. When I say the half-life of fluoxetine is 15 days, I say a universal law. This is not correct, but most laws in physics are not correct. The law of gravity is not correct, but we say that it is a law. And when I say the half-life of fluoxetine is 15 days, I say a law which is not correct, but which is accepted like that. Yeah, and this is different with epidemiology. When I say there is a correlation between height and weight, I don't say a universal law. I say this is a correlation, this is only true statistically. And you can also do statistics with literary corpus. This is text mining. And you can propose universal law with a literary corpus. This is neurobiology. You use words and you say universal laws. And you can use hermeneutics with the literary corpus. This is called qualitative studies. You see? And so the distinction between qualitative and quantitative is not so simple. You have many ways to consider words and numbers. So, in fact, the opposition between qualitative and quantitative approach is not so simple. Of course, with quantity, you can aggregate data. Because you use number, you can compute means. And when you use means, this is a way to aggregate data. And when you use means, the noise decreases and the precision increases. This is like a microscope. Doing statistics, dealing with number, is like using a microscope with data. This is a very interesting property. And we have statistical tests of hypotheses. We have p-value inferior to 5%. Even if there is a huge misuse of these p-values, we have a common language about inference. But qualitative approach give an access to a more comprehensive picture. You can understand why, how, in a more refined way than with statistics. You can combine in the same design quantitative and qualitative approach. This is called a mixed method design. For instance, in an epidemiological study, you can select a subsample and do open interview with this subsample to raise questions. For instance, in HIV, you know, it happened when you do an epidemiological study about the exchange of syringe. How do you call that in English? Syringe exchange. You know, heroin user exchange syringe and it transmits HIV. And woman heroin user exchange more syringe than male. This is what say epidemiology. But of course the question is why? Why? And if you do a qualitative study, you realize that woman heroin user have a boyfriend with a dealer. And she exchanged a syringe with the dealer because she has no choice, because he is the dealer. So he gives the drug and you have to share the syringe. And so if you want to protect women against HIV, you have to understand why they exchange syringe, and you have to do a qualitative study for that. So there is a great interest to do this type of mixed method research, and of course big data, forum, etc. are an occasion to do that. But, and I will end with this example, you can also imagine other design that are neither quantitative, neither qualitative. And I give you this example. This is a study which is published. The question was raised by a young colleague, psychoanalyst. He was doing a PhD on this question. Healthy adults who had experienced a sibling cancer during childhood keep a scar from it. You know, when you are a kid and you have a sister or a brother, you have always a fantasy. You have always the fantasy that if your sister or brother would die, it would be a good thing. But if your sister or brother becomes ill, then because you have the fantasy, you feel guilty, but because you interpret this fantasy as the cause of the disease. And because you cannot verbalize that, you keep that during all your life and make some kind of neurosis. Well, this was the hypothesis of the colleague. And so he came to see us and said, well, but perhaps this is only fantasy. Perhaps this is only in my mind. Perhaps it does not exist in reality. So I would like to do an experiment to show that it is not only a fantasy. And we took 7 cases, that is 7 adults who had, when they were a kid, a sister or a brother with a cancer, 7 control matched. And we used a 5-minute interview of free associating speech. That was when you are walking in the street, when you are going to the cinema, when you are eating with your neighbors, just explain what is your life. And there was a 5-minute video. We randomized this 14 video and we gave them to 3 psychoanalysts, 3 CBTs, 3 residents, 3 medical students, 3 oncologists, saying that you have 14 videos, 7 belong to case, 7 belong to control, and now you have to find the 7 and the 7. And the answer is only the psychoanalyst found the 7 from the 7 with a p-value less than 1,000. And so you see, is it a quantitative study or is it a qualitative study? This is There is an interpretation of a video, this is typically qualitative, but there are statistics, this is typically quantitative. And you see, the sample size is only 14. So everybody can do such a study. And it tackles very interesting hypotheses, very clinical, very refined hypotheses. And this is my last slide. My guess is that we are at a moment of epistemological and methodological turn. In particular because of big data, but big data are only an alibi of that. This turn is not enough conceptualized. What does Google at the moment? You know, Google does huge statistics with data that we write every day. And are they doing, what is the epistemological content of what Google does with this data is something which is not tackled by philosophers. And the main important is that there are important possibilities of new research design and even paradigm. And these new research design are not expensive. So you can do them very easily. So before engaging in huge randomized control trial, in huge cohort study, try to think before to original design, perhaps more appropriated to what you want to show. Thank you.